We don't know why, but we find abandoned buildings and abandoned places fascinating. We know we're not alone in that. YouTube is full of videos made by urban explorers who've gained access to long-forgotten locations, and they get millions of views. Unfortunately, nobody has the time to sit through every single one of those videos. The good news is that you don't have to. We're already familiar with the most incredible abandoned locations in the world, and we've put some of them together for you in one place with this video. We're starting with a building you may have seen in the news recently. This tower block in Baghdad, Iraq was once known as the Turkish Restaurant Building, even though the restaurant that gave it its name closed shortly after the tower opened in the 1980s. It spent most of its life after that as a place for government offices, but it stood empty for years after it was bombed during the American invasion of Iraq in 2003. Now it's become a focal point for protesters, and the protesters like to party. Anti-government protests in Baghdad are common, but some people have reported that the empty tower block has been used to hide snipers in the past, and that those snipers have assassinated prominent protesters. Now the tower's under the control of the protesters. There's nowhere for snipers or anybody else to hide. When the protests are at their busiest and loudest, the building is lit up and begins to play music. None of the temporary residents know how long they'll have to stay here for, but as long as they're able to protect their fellow citizens by doing so, they'll remain in place. When this silk mill in Maryland closed for the final time in 1957, the doors were locked and the whole building turned into a time capsule. Now, over 60 years later, we're being allowed to take a peek inside and see what the workers left behind. This is the old Lanaconning Silk Mill, which opened in 1905, but had become obsolete by the mid-1950s. During its peak years, it had over 300 permanent staff, but by the time the end came, that number had dwindled to just a few dozen. It almost looks as if those few dozen people were planning to come back one day. Their drinks are still on the tables, their shoes are still here, and their calendars are still open to July 1957. The mill's current owner has deliberately left everything exactly as it was and now charges $75 for a tour of his premises. He hopes to use the money to fund some urgently needed repair work on the building's roof. The looms and the equipment are technically still in full working order. Everything has a thick coating of dust, but aside from that, it looks like the factory's ready for the employees to turn up for their next shift tomorrow morning. If Minister Horace Burgess is to be believed, he built the ornate Minister's Treehouse in Crossville, Tennessee, because God spoke to him directly and told him to do so in 1993. Horace didn't want to upset God by mocking him with a standard treehouse, so he set out to build the largest treehouse in the world. It's a feat of engineering. At 97 feet tall, the treehouse is taller than the 80-foot-tall oak that supports it. The basic shape of the treehouse was complete by 1994, but Burgess spent much of the following 14 years adding pieces and features to the treehouse bit by bit. There are 80 rooms, 5 stories, a full-size church, and a bell tower. There are even makeshift bells fashioned from oxygen cylinders inside the tower. Burgess never charged an entry fee for the church and said everyone was welcome at any time of the day, but the local fire service disagreed. They viewed the whole structure as a fire risk and insisted on having it closed to visitors in 2010. Sadly, it seems the fire service had a point. The treehouse was badly damaged by a fire in late 2019. Officially speaking, the Zawazurski Repair and Maintenance Center in Perm, close to Russia's Ural Mountains, isn't abandoned. Despite that, nobody ever seems to be at work there, and no repair work is ever done on the boats that are moored there. That's especially bad news for Mercury and Sunrise, a pair of abandoned hydrofoils that have been here for several years, waiting for someone with the right talents to come along and make them seaworthy again. Because there's nobody guarding the site, it's easy to get inside the hydrofoils and take a look around. Sadly, given the extent of damage and decay, it appears unlikely that anybody would ever be able to fully restore them from this condition, even if the center was to resume work. You can get a sense of what the vessels looked like during their golden years, but time and nature have taken a heavy toll on both of them. There isn't much left of the original Kowloon walled city in Hong Kong anymore, but there's still enough standing for you to get an impression of what the original site once looked like. And if you can't, we have these pictures to help. Once upon a time, it was the most densely populated area in the entire world, with 35,000 people crammed into barely more than 2,000 dwellings, all piled on top of each other. It was lawless, and it was full of illegal gambling parlors and drug dens. The police were reluctant to go there, and it was known that tax collectors refused to enter. Despite that, some former residents insist it was the friendliest place in the world, and that they still miss living there. The origins of the building come from a small fort built during the Sung dynasty between the years of 960 and 1297, which housed imperial soldiers. It was significantly expanded during the 19th century to become a garrison town, but by 1947 it was a gigantic squat. It effectively declared independence and governed itself until 1993, when the residents finally accepted an offer to be rehomed. If you look upon the church of San Juan Parangarrocudio without knowing the story behind it, you might wonder how people ever managed to carve such a beautiful church into a pile of rocks. Sadly, that isn't how it got its unique appearance. There used to be a whole village here, but it was destroyed when a volcano erupted in 1943. The church is the only thing that was left standing, and the rock surrounding it is actually lava. The eruption of the volcano carried on for 8 years, incinerating everything in its path, but always leaving the church mostly untouched even as it passed over the graves. Because the lava moved so slowly, nobody in the village died. They simply moved and built a new church in an area that the lava couldn't reach. The old church might be half buried in the hardened lava rock now, but it retains an air of defiance. It's visited regularly by tourists and also by the descendants of the people who lived in the original village, keen to find out about their heritage. Everything about the decor of the Jungmi Land theme park in Seoul, South Korea screams 1980s. For that reason, you might suspect that it's been abandoned since that decade. That isn't the case. It opened in 1980 and simply never got a redesign or a fresh coat of paint over the years, and limped along until it was forced to close in 2011 due to low visitor numbers. There were rumors that the park was haunted, but most people thought that the stories were made up by the owners, who wanted to drum up more business any way they could. Oddly, the park still has an owner. There's still an entry fee if you want to take a look around. Jungmi Land is now marketed as an abandoned theme park, and if you pay $5 to go inside, you're welcome to walk around and take as many pictures as you want. You can even have the merry-go-round switched on for $30. Some K-pop bands have even come here to film, using the rusty scenery as a backdrop for their latest music video. During the 1940s, Canfranc International Railway Station was owned and controlled by the Nazis. By the 1980s, it was home to an astroparticle research laboratory. It's been quite a varied life for the old station, which was the biggest in Europe when it opened in 1928, but sadly, its tale may soon come to an end. A mere 8 years after the Grand Station opened as the gateway to a new rail link between Spain and France, the route was closed down due to French concerns about the Spanish Civil War. By the time it opened again, the Second World War had begun. The Nazis seized control of the station and used it to ship stolen gold to and from France. It's thought that some Nazi war criminals escaped justice after the German defeat by hiding on goods trains leaving the station. Business went back to normal after the war, but a huge steam train derailed within the station in 1970 and caused extensive damage. After that, it sat empty until 1985, when the tunnels down below the station were used by Spanish physicists to conduct particle experiments. Nowadays, it's heavily graffiti tagged and vandalized and will likely soon be demolished. The town of Whistler in British Columbia, Canada is well known for being a skiing haven. It's far less well known for the ghost town which is hiding in the woods just above it. Parkhurst was always a rustic and roughshod town, But it used to be in better condition than this. With nobody living here to take care of it, the forest has started the process of breaking down the wooden buildings and reclaiming them for nature. Parkhurst was built as a logging outpost owned and operated by the Barr Brothers Logging Company since 1926. 70 loggers and their families called the town home, and the settlement grew to a point where stores, a school, and a church were built during the 1930s. By the 1960s, though, there wasn't as much call for logging as there used to be. The families moved away, and the last resident called it quits in 1966. It still gets the occasional visitor, though, and some of those who do visit like to leave colorful graffiti murals behind. This labor camp in the Lubin Quarry of Krakow, Poland, is a foreboding sight. It looks like the type of camp built by the Nazis, but it isn't a real one. This is actually a replica of the original Plazo labor camp, which was torn down after the war. What stands at the site now is actually a film set that was used during the making of Steven Spielberg's movie Schindler's List, although it's a match for the design of the original in every way. The quarry is also where the first camp was located, which would have been a few hundred feet away from Spielberg's version. Everything about this location is eerie. The limestone still bears the scars of the work performed here by Jewish prisoners, and there's a line of Jewish tombstones running down the middle of the quarry as a road. Like the labor camp, they're replicas, but it's known that real tombstones were once placed there during the war to mock the inmates as they worked. The old set is falling apart after almost 30 years without maintenance, and the whole area is a place of haunting abandonment. At first glance, Pone Castle in Romania looks like one more crumbling old castle in a country that's full of them. But you'll look at it in a whole new light when we tell you who used to live here. This is the former home of the legendary cruel tyrant Vlad the Impaler. The fact that it's still standing at all and able to welcome visitors is a testament to the skill of 13th century mortar and stone workers. Vlad III, the man who inspired the fictional character of Dracula, lived at the castle during the 15th century, treating it as his own personal fortress. When his brother Radu Bey laid siege to the castle, Vlad's wife Justina threw herself out of the window of the tower to avoid capture. It's not quite the imposing sight it was during Vlad's days because a landslide in 1888 took away one entire external wall and part of the fortress. But it's still structurally sound elsewhere. You'll need excellent cardio to reach the castle steps, though. It's at the top of more than 1,000 stairs. If there was a venue in your hometown called the Woodpecker Disco, you'd have to visit at least once just out of curiosity, right? And back in its day, the Woodpecker Disco in Servia, Italy, was the most popular night venue in the area. That was back in 1952, though, and it's fallen on hard times since then. The Woodpecker Disco was a classy establishment with world-class orchestras and top-of-the-range food and drink. As it grew larger and louder, though, local residents began to complain about the noise, and a new location had to be found for the disco. That location is the abandoned hulk we see today, which was built in 1966. The huge fiberglass dome was specifically built for its acoustic properties, and the archways around the exterior that meant the venue was neither truly indoor nor outdoor were seen as revolutionary for the era. An electrical fire spoiled all the fun during the 1970s, destroying everything apart from the dome. No attempt was ever made to repair or reopen the Woodpecker, and now it stands empty, save for the occasional illegal raves and parties which have been known to occur from time to time. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and you will be the first to know when a new video comes out. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.